The U.S Coastguard inspection. It was near the end of my babysitting stint on the bucket. I was nearly at the end of my first contract, and we had not long completed our transit of the Panama Canal. We're heading up to San Francisco. Once there, I would be leaving the bucket forever to take up residency on the V. As soon as the bucket hit United States controlled waters, the Coast Guard would guide us into the territorial waters and inspect the ship for environmental defects, as well as searching the ship for drugs, weapons, and anything else that was not on the ship's manifest. The Coast Guard would also search passengers and crew cabins, as well as give all passengers and crew an immigration interview. Any passenger or crew member that would fail the interview would be refused entry, and they would not be allowed to leave the ship whilst in the United States waters. The next stop after San Francisco was Hawaii, which was 5 more days at sea, and you couldn't even get off there as Hawaii is a US state. The next stop after that would be another 5 days in New Zealand. I was unconcerned as I was leaving on day 2 of San Francisco. If I failed, I'd be marched to the nearest plane and sent home regardless. The day before we docked in San Francisco was a crew party. At this point in my seafaring life, I wasn't quite a seasoned drinker just yet, though I was on my way. After the course of the party, I consumed a 6-pack of beer before I hit the rum. The party fizzled out as soon as the last orders went. I guess this was down to a few factors, such as the cabin inspections, the crew immigration interviews, and people all saved themselves for the overnighter. I found myself being the last person in the crew bar. This was pretty shit, as it was only 2 AM local time. I slammed back my last drink and started to feel a bit giddy. I left the bar and staggered through the deserted crew mess. I continued to the end of the room and made it to the stairwell. As I went down one deck towards the M4 corridor, I had to brace myself on the handrails. I could feel the heat emanating from my body as I struggled down to the next deck. I made it without falling down. This was the result and a half. Now all I needed to do was walk to the far end of the corridor without making a cunt out of myself and getting caught, breathalyzed and sacked. As I marched along the deck, I was swaying and walking in a zigzag, occasionally bumping into the bulkheads. Success. I finally made it. Now all I needed to do was go up one deck, past a short row of passenger cabins, and into the crew cabin area. I took a few deep breaths in, then bolted up the stairs, through the splash-tight doors, and fell into the passenger area. I looked around and no one was there. Another success. My head started to spin and I could feel the colour leaving my body. This was getting dangerous, I thought to myself. Best get moving again. I staggered past the passenger cabins, then made it to the crew corridor. I barged through the door and fell over. I had to keep moving, so I crawled along the deck until I made it to my door. Pulled out my key card and jammed it into the lock. The door clicked open and I crawled inside. I reached on top of my desk and found a bottle of water. I pulled it down and started to gulp from the bottle as I sat all pathetic-like on the floor. After a few minutes of trying to compose myself, my body didn't know if it was going to puke or shit itself. My head was still spinning and I made the gamble. I would take a shit and try and hold my puke in. I crawled over to the bathroom and pulled myself up to the toilet. I managed to undo my trousers, then pull them down and just about made it. As soon as I sat in the toilet, my arse exploded with diarrhea. My body just wouldn't stop trying to flush the shit out of itself. Then the smell hit me. It hit me like I was slapped with a wet fish. I leaned over the sink and began to chunder into the basin. Chundering and shitting at the same time is really a painful thing to do as your core muscles are spasming hard to get everything out. My eyes were watering and everything was just hurting. About half an hour later, my body just stopped expelling fluids from both directions, and I just slumped there on the toilet with my trousers around my ankles and my head resting on the sink that was quite full of festering vomit. I woke up some time later feeling like death. I was no longer drunk, just sore and dehydrated. My face was covered with vomit and I decided to jump into the shower. It was the best course of action I could do. I kicked off my trousers and stood up. I had splats of shit on my leg and I could feel the puke in my hair. I looked at the toilet and it was definitely time to flush. There was so much shit in the bowl, it took 3 attempts for it to just fuck off down the hole. I jumped in the shower and washed the secret humiliation away. Once I was dry and in a fresh set of underpants, it was time to deal with the chunder in the sink. I searched around my cabin for a plastic bag. Once I found one, I put it over my hand and started to bear the chunder into the toilet. I flushed every so often just to get rid of the vile stuff. Eventually, the toilet refused to flush. This became a problem as there was no longer a way to dispose of the evidence. I kicked the toilet hoping that a bit of gentle persuasion would do the trick, but it didn't. I started to panic. What the fuck was I going to do? I paused for a while. Yes, I had it. I get a metal coat hanger and shove it down the U-bend and keep hammering away so I could break the chunks of chunder into smaller pieces. I then cut a plastic bottle in half and used the bottom end as a plunger and forced the chunder away. I left the bathroom and foraged around for a metal hanger. Most of my hangers are plastic, but eventually I found a metal one. It was also fortunate that I had a few water bottles knocking about. I picked up a bottle, then went to my tool drawer, pulled out my work knife. I chopped the bottle into two and returned it to the bathroom armed with my improvised plumbing tools and began to get to work. I bent the coat hanger into the required position and started forcing it down the toilet as though my arm became a pneumatic drill. The water began to look like very fine vomit as the chunks became smaller and smaller. As I was hammering away, I could feel my body retching again. Then it happened. I threw up once more. The smell of vomit was enough to turn my stomach again. This was not good. I had now doubled my workload. Time was now running out and I had to deal with this without anyone finding out. I got the bottom half of the plastic bottle and jammed it as far into the toilet as I possibly could. This managed to create a vacuum, and then with all my weight I forced the bottle in and began to plunge. It was working. The vomit was beginning to be forced down the toilet. I heard a gurgle from the system, and the chundered up vomit water came back. No fucking way, I mouthed. This is not good. No fucking way, I mouthed. This isn't going to work. What the fuck am I going to do now? I took my vomit covered hands out of the toilet and rinsed them off using the shower as the sink was still blocked with chunder. I dried my hands on the hand towel and found a cigarette. I lit the cigarette and began to formulate a plan B. After 3 or 4 cigarettes, I came up with a solution. I would use the top end of the cut open water bottle and use that as a funnel to another empty water bottle. And then I would bail out the vomit water into the empty bottle and then do the same with the sink. What could go wrong? The first obstacle was to marry the 2 bottlenecks together so the chunder water wouldn't leak out everywhere. I had to look around my cabin. I threw things out my way until I found it. LX tape. I wrapped the 2 necks together. I'd take the 2 necks together. Now I had a working funnel. I stood the collection bottle on the shower base and began to bail out the toilet. It was working. I got to the bottom and there was still a chunder residual. There was still some residual chunder at the bottom of the toilet. There was still residual chunder coating the inside of the toilet bowl. That wasn't too much of an issue. I grabbed the dirty sock and wet it from the tap in the sink, then gave it a nice clean. The toilet was the cleanest I've ever seen it. What result? The next part of my master plan was to unblock the sink. Once again I put my hand in a plastic bag and began to pull out the chunks of doom. Each handful went straight into the collection bottle. Once again I grabbed the coat hanger and bent it into hook shape so I could send it into the plug hole and make any wedge chunks of chunder smaller. Once I got bored of nothing really happening with the coat hanger, I opened up the tap to test if the water would drain away. It didn't. I grabbed the bottom half of the chopped up bottle once again and started to plunge with it. Yet again this didn't have the effect I wanted. I had to look under the sink to see if I could unscrew the U-bend. I gave it a forceful twist anti-clockwise and it began to loosen. Sweet as a nun's untouched chuff, I said to myself. I used the bottom half of the bottle to bail out the churned vomit water from the sink until it was near enough empty. The collection bottle was 2/3 full. Now this is where it could go badly wrong and my bathroom floor would be full of churned up vomit water. I placed the collection bottle under the U-bend as they began to unscrew it. The vomit-laden drain water began to gush out into the collection bottle and then it ran dry. The collection bottle was near enough full at this point, so I carefully removed the LX tape and separated the funnel from the bottle, just in case the ship bounced and knocked over the bottle of vomit water over. I screwed the lid on tight and then placed the bottle of vomit water into the shower base. I shoved the vomit hook coat hanger into the U-bend to make sure the blockage was gone, and a few more chunks were pulled out. I placed those chunks into the plastic bag, then placed the plastic bag into the shower base. Whilst I reassembled my sink's U-bend, I opened the tap and the water drained nicely. Using my other dirty sock, I gave the sink a nice clean down and it sparkled. Now what to do with the churned vomit water? Now what Now what to do with the churned vomit water and cleaning items? How could I dispose of these at this time of day? This would be my defining moment of this escapade. The garbage room was closed at this god-awful time of day, not to mention I just wouldn't get away with dumping it in a general waste. I'd have to dump it somewhere away from my cabin and not get caught on the ship's CCTV or by the night manager and his patrol team. I bundled all the evidence into another plastic bag, then left my cabin. There was another stairwell going towards another level of the theatre, downwards, and to the promenade deck, upwards. There were no cameras in this stairwell, so I walked over and casually dropped the bag over the railings and down 2 decks. Then I legged it back to my cabin. I had one more shower, then went to bed and hoped that I would slip the noose. The next morning I was out of my bed by 10 a.m. The Coastguard was already on board. I knew that my cabin was due to be searched within the hour. I went into the bathroom to admire my handiwork. I flushed the toilet to see if it was still fucked, and it was, though all the traces of vomit were now gone. The sink was already tested. I took a deep breath in via my nose, and I could still smell the lingering stench of chunder. I went over to my toiletries cabinet and discharged an entire can of deodorant into the bathroom. I directed the spray into the toilet bowl and also down the sink's plug hole. I left the bathroom, closed the door and had a cigarette. Once the cigarette was stubbed out, I opened up the bathroom door and took a sniff. All I could smell was Lynx Africa. The perfect cover-up was now complete. I lit another cigarette and started to relax. Within half an hour, there was a knock at my door. As I went to go towards my door, it flung open. There was a member of ship's security and a man in a strange uniform standing there. A dog barged its way into my room, had a sniff around and fucked off, and so did the 2 men at my door. The door closed and I let out a sigh of relief. I had one more cigarette and felt that it was time for some breakfast before I scheduled for my immigration interview. I stubbed my cigarette out and left my cabin. I decided to walk past the stairwell of the scene of the crime from a few hours ago. I looked over the handrails and noticed a group of sniffer dogs, security officers and coastguard inspectors standing around a puddle of vomit and a load of debris. I walked the other way and fled the scene of the crime, and then made it to breakfast.